So the title of the book I chose was Young, Gifted, and Black, Promoting High Achievement in African American Students. This book was written by Teresa Perry, Claude Steele, and Asa Hilliard III. So there's not a lot of just information, like even on our the library state website, just on the internet, anywhere about how Teresa Perry grew up. And actually the majority of this book is written by Teresa Perry, and so I just thought it was really interesting that there's a lot of information about her credentials and where she used to teach and where she teaches now, but there isn't a whole lot about where she grew up or anything like that. But currently she serves as a professor in the Department of Africana Studies and Education at Simmons College and director of the Simmons College and Beacon Press Education and Democracy Lecture and Book. So I think that's really, really interesting to me. She has a lot of research under her belt. And I'm kind of going to split these up because this book is composed of 3 different authors. So I'm going to give you author, a little background, and then talk about their theories, just so that they're not all running together. So in her portion of the book, she actually has 3 parts to one essay. So the first part is called Up from the Parched Earth Toward a Theory of African American Achievement. And there are a lot of quotes that I really like from this section of the book. One being that psychosocial and cognitive competencies that are required of African Americans are precisely because they are African American in order for them to achieve the highest levels in school. Now that it kind of refers to where African American students are highly represented in the underachievement category, point blank period. And it's saying that, well, her point is that this is because they are African American. Mm-hmm. And it's not in the negative sense that, oh, black people just can't achieve. That's actually, she's arguing for the exact opposite of that. And because learning is fundamentally contextual, she wants to argue that there are extra social, emotional, cognitive, and political competencies required of African American youth. So, kind of like what Emily's saying, your culture, where you come from, it makes up who you are. And if your parents were not taught, you can achieve, you can go for and be anything that you want to be, then it's not passed on. It's not rejuvenated in the next generation. So her idea in Freedom for Literacy and Literacy for Freedom was to bring back some of the narratives of African Americans, that slave narratives, that's even contemporary narratives. She starts with Frederick Douglass and even on up to Ben Carson and Maya Angelou. And these narratives kind of represent the idea that African Americans can achieve, where slave narratives represented literacy equaled freedom. This is how I achieve. This is how I get ahead. It literally, being able to read and write meant that I could be free. Where contemporary narratives, literacy was a way to claim one's humanity, to equip oneself with a weapon to be used in the struggle for freedom. So it wasn't in the sense that, I'm not allowed to by the law. It's more in the sense that I can establish myself in America that's predominantly where the mainstream idea is white culture. So then achieving in post-civil rights America. So all 3 of these ideas kind of blend together. When I was reading it, I was like, how in the world is giving me all of these narratives? There are so many narratives in here, just in her first section, and I was just like, how in the world? I'm halfway through and I'm like, I don't understand how this helps me understand. I get where it comes from now. It makes more sense now, but I don't understand how it's going to promote this high achievement. And she lists there's a whole list of questions, why should African American students try to achieve if they have no idea that their achievements are ever going to be recognized? If if it's ever going to matter in the grand scheme of things, why should I even try? What's the point in trying to play the game if, you know, I never get to win? What's the point? And so she went on to say that it's the idea of instilling the freedom for literacy and literacy for freedom in our students now. So even if they don't get that at home, it's not to diminish their culture at home, not to diminish their home life at all, but show them that they can achieve. There's a rhetoric that says, you know, you can do it. It's okay if you mess up. It's fine. We're all different and we all learn different. We all achieve differently. So instilling that rhetoric in your classroom was like a really big portion of that. It provides counter narratives, what our students normally hear and see. You know, when you're in school, I mean, at least where I went to high school, you got like 400 years of slavery, then these 4 or 5 black people did really good things. So, you know, black people can do it, but there's so much more. There's so much more to it than just, oh, these 4 or 5 black people paved the way. But, you know, there were networks of schools. There were networks of, you know, reading and writing and, I guess, schools that for African Americans, you know, they did it in secret. But then even once it was legal, we get to learn about how Black African Americans still did it in private because there was this stigma that, you know, it's still wrong. We still can't get ahead because we might get in trouble for it. So in the second portion of this, second portion of this book, the author's name is Claude Steele, and he was born in Phoenix, Illinois, to a social worker mother and a truck driver father. So considering, you know, when he was born, of course he would, you know, take interest in social issues and civil rights as a child. He was born in 46, and, you know, 64, I think, technically was when, you know, segregation ended, technically, but, so he took an interest in these subjects, and he was also encouraged by his father to attend rallies and sit-ins and all of those kinds of things. He has a master's degree and PhD in social psychology, master's and PhD in social psychology with a minor in statistical psychology. And actually, I didn't do a whole lot of research until after I finished, and I went back and I was like, oh, this is super interesting. It makes sense now because he's the one, the majority of his is focused on statistics and a project that he did testing students. So I thought that was super interesting. Okay, so his portion is entitled Stereotype Threat in African American Student Achievement. He addresses disidentification and the stereotype threat. So disidentification just means that you separate almost like your cultural identity from the domain. So I walk into this classroom and a part of me, whether I realize it or not, or whether I'm actually trying to do it, dissociates my home, my culture, where I grew up, my little niche, from the domain of, you know, European teaching. This is what I'm in school. I'm in school to teach. Yeah. Right, the institution.
Of school or something.
Right, where I'm here to learn how to teach. And then the stereotype threat is that students believe, or they tend to perform worse when they believe they're being watched for ability. So students work really hard when they're testing. Those African American students that go against the grain, and, you know, they achieve. They do great in school. They go on to be doctors and nurses and lawyers. These are the people that we think of that worked hard all day and all night and pushed and pushed and pushed, and they did achieve. So his question is, then, does race create a boundary between experience, your emotion, and your relationships? So the two, disidentification and stereotype threat, I think are very closely related, I mean, naturally. So before I go on to kind of explain the project that he did, the question I have is, how can a student's performance be affected by a stereotype if he or she does not feel threatened by that stereotype? So that's going to be those students in the classroom who don't even try. They're looking at the test questions and they're like, I don't know any of this. So they go through and they just kind of guess at answers and they're like, okay, I got a bad score, whatever. It is what it is. I knew it was going to happen anyway. So they just kind of nuzzle in the stereotype. They don't try to defy it. So what happened is that the research showed that the most achievement-oriented students, who were also the most skilled, most motivated, and most confident, were the most likely to be impaired by a stereotype threat. So those kids I was talking about before that are studying day and night, that are doing their work, and they're doing the hardest, they're working their hardest to be the best and defy every stereotype that's ever been made about them, and every stereotype that's ever been made about someone who was their father, their mother, or their grandmother, their grandfather. These are the kids that are affected the most because they're doing everything they can to defy that stereotype, and then it still seems like it's not working. So I have a little video, and it's about
race has always been there. People need to see.
So there's a documentary, and it's called "I'm Not Racist, Am I?" And I think it would be a really cool documentary to be able to watch. You actually can't just like rent it or buy it or anything like that. You actually have to go to a viewing by the director of the film. And it kind of goes back to what Jill was talking about before, about those who have an advantage and those who have privilege, and getting kids to see that, not everyone has the same cultural context.
Race has always been there. People need to see that. Instead of ignoring it and trying to be like, there's no segregation, there's no slavery, it's still here though, and people need to know.
The film, I'm Not Racist, Am I?, follows 12 New York City high school students over 9 months as they participate in exercises and sometimes difficult discussions that directly address the bias they deal with on a daily basis.
One kid said to me that, like, oh, I thought all Asians are supposed to be smart, like, what's wrong with you?
Not in theaters. The film is being shown exclusively to groups of young people and their parents. The film's director, Catherine Wigginton Green, says parents tend to find the film especially challenging.
They're really seeing that, kids maybe are going to dances or have friends with kids who are different race, and so they think, oh, they just have it all figured out. But what we realized in making the film is that kids don't, and they're not talking about it with their families.
The film has been screened repeatedly at Woodrow Wilson High School, a large multicultural public school in Washington, D.C. Principal Kimberly Martin says her students needed to see it.
From the first day that I was in this school, I could not believe that there are classrooms that are all African American or all Latino, and then there are classrooms that are all white.
Student James Sorokin agreed that a diverse school population does not necessarily translate to racial integration.
I think that, honestly, like, white kids hang out with white kids here and black kids hang out with black kids generally.
The film convinced student Amilcar Hudson that talking about racial issues like self-segregation is the best way to address them. But he acknowledges that talking about race remains a challenge.
I think that's the scariest part about it. I understand that there's a racial problem in this country, but the fact that people don't really feel comfortable talking about it means that we're almost subconsciously satisfied with it, and we're okay with this going on.
I understand it's so hard to hear that you are inherently racist because of something you can't control, but isn't it worse to hear that you are less than people inherently because of the color of your skin?
Oh, wow.
Students at Wilson High have formed a group called Common Ground to encourage interaction and discussion among students of different cultural backgrounds. Jeff Custer.
Okay, so I love that she said, isn't it even worse to hear that you're inherently, less than other people? And that's kind of the idea that they put forth in this book, that, oh, well, I'm inherently less than because you expect me to be automatically. And so kids won't try. Kids feel like they're not heard. Kids, in particular in Steele's portion of the book, he mentions that he went back to, you know, where he graduated from. The kid said